أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us as we continue our conversation around the life and biographies of Ahlul Bayt, and we continue to talk about our 10th Imam, Ali ibn Muhammad al-Hadi alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You're noticing our earlier time frame for this discussion. Hopefully, we can use this time frame to invite our children to recite, and more of our community members can participate in reciting of Dua Tawassul every week, as it is an important tool that we possess in seeking the intercession of Ahlul Bayt for the fulfilling of our hajat with Allah. And it's a great practice if we can teach our kids from a young age that when they're in need, that they can seek assistance to have their desires fulfilled by Allah with the help of Ahlul Bayt. And as we continue to talk about the Ahlul Bayt to learn about their importance, we continue our discussion around the life of our 10th Imam. Now, as we were discussing the life of Imam al-Hadi, one of the unique attributes of Imam al-Hadi is that he was contemporary to 7 of the Khulafa of Banu Abbas, 7 different Khalifas. And that each of these Khalifas had a different impact on the environment and the time, and how that impacted our Imam and what went on during those time periods. So one of the goals of analyzing the biography of Imam al-Hadi is looking at the Khilafat and seeing how the Khilafat shifted, and what were some of the things that we know about the Imam from that time period. So these 7 Khulafa that we talk about begin with Ma'mun, that he's born in the door of Ma'mun, the one who was responsible for the shahadat, for the oppression of his father as well too, and that it was one of those time periods that Ma'mun was the one who killed his grandfather Imam Raza, oppressed his father, and eventually was the Khalifa at the time of the birth of Imam al-Hadi. Now, Ma'mun's Khilafat lasted in its entirety for a period of 20 years, including the assassination of Imam Raza, including majority of the life of Imam al-Jawad, that Imam al-Jawad is martyred shortly after Ma'mun dies by Mu'tasam, the successor. But Ma'mun's Khilafat and its impact to the life of Imam al-Hadi is very significant. Actually, Ma'mun's Khilafat did a lot of things that created a lot of impact within Islam. They weren't always positive, as you would imagine. One of the important things that Ma'mun did was he tried to destabilize or to shift the focus upon religion and separate religion from, or use religion as a tool to make people more volatile and easier to control. To do this, Ma'mun had to do a few different things. One thing that Ma'mun did was he established something called Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Now, the House of Wisdom, many times in many different scriptures and writings, is considered one of the, for example, great accomplishments of the Banu Abbas and one of the great learning institutions that was established. But its fundamental was to say that the teachings of Ahlul Bayt were so prevalent that as you studied Islam, you are likely to come in contact with the Ahlul Bayt and come back to the Ahlul Bayt and the path of Ahlul Bayt and recognize their authority. So Bayt al-Hikmah's establishment was what? To bring other philosophies, ideologies, religions from other languages that had strong established histories and a wide variety of speakership present in them to the Arabic language. Bayt al-Hikmah's responsibility was to bring Greco-Roman philosophy, to bring atheism, theology of other sorts, Christianity, Judaism into the Arabic language and make it more accessible, Arabic or Islamic languages in general, and make it more accessible to people, to create a contemporary debating environment of various different faiths as opposed to focusing just on the Islamic faith. This system of Ma'mun was designed in such a way to dilute the effort and the influence of the knowledge that was already coming out of Islam. That if Islamic knowledge prevailed and Islamic knowledge became the lingua franca of all the people and they were very well versed in Islamic sciences and theology, the argument would be that why is this Khalifa, who is not a complete representation of Islamic ideology and faith, leading the country. Beit al-Hikmah's purpose was expand the diaspora to such an extent that what the Khalifa does fits into some category of some approved system of political authority and social authority, such that where he disagrees with Islam, here's a counterpoint where his authority and his actions would be valid. The beauty and benefit of this was that when people would present an argument that, oh, this is an un-Islamic behavior, the counterpoint was, but is it wrong? Why? Because, oh, we saw others do this. We've seen other ideologies, other schools of thought. In Greco-Roman philosophy, we saw these elements. All of these different points that were brought about were as a consciousness to kind of present a critique that, okay, if it's not Islam that he's doing, but is it wrong? And it brought about this structure of creating doubt in the minds of people and separating them from Islam and creating some infrastructure that could validate actions that were un-Islamic in their most basic principles. Similar to that is the establishment of the Mu'tazila doctrine, talking about the creation versus the ever existence of the Holy Quran and creating this differentiation in society of saying what theological ideology is present. Now, let me explain something. The Dawr of Ma'mun and the traditional system of scholarship, many times when we talk about schools of thought, we talk about schools of thought in fiqh, in Islamic jurisprudence. And we mentioned the variety, the four major schools of thought of the Ahl Sunnah. These are all fiqh and how law is interpreted. But similarly to how we look at Islam and saying that there is the philosophy and aqidah of Islam, and there's the ahkam of Islam, the Ahl Sunnah have the same process as well, or Muslims as a majority all agree that there's a philosophy that predicates the action. Within that philosophy, there are different schools of thought within the Sunni diaspora. Ma'mun championed the Mu'tazila doctrine and the Mu'tazila structure, which was not the common and popular thought process, and on the basis of this, he created a system of persecution against those who disagreed with his doctrine. This allowed him to find political adversaries and have a reason to persecute them. Oh, you don't agree with the overwhelming doctrine that it has been established under the time of Ma'mun, and it became something that was a tool to use to now create fear, isolation, executions, to remove political others on the basis of using Islam as an ideological symbol that would be that, oh, if you disagree, you're a deviant. And this system that he utilized was called a mihna, and the mihna was almost like a inquisition of sorts. And it was something that we used very widely to find people who, on the principles of disagreement, could be removed and executed. This became a tool that he used to strengthen the rule of the Banu Abbas, to establish their overwhelming authority, to create a system where people could be manipulated in the process of following the system of governance. This tool that he created was something that many of the Khulafa after him benefited, including Mu'tasim, his brother, whose khilafat lasts for a period of about 9 years. And the signature of his khilafat is that immediately as he becomes the Khalifa, he's responsible for the assassination of our 9th Imam, Imam al-Jawad, where he uses his niece, Fadl, the daughter of Ma'mun, and facilitates the assassination of the Imam, which brings Imam Hadi to the position of Imamat at the age of 6 or 7, the youngest seen at that time. Mu'tasim, after creating this change and removing Imam al-Jawad, now shifts his focus to the political point in time, and Imam al-Hadi is at this point in time 6, and he stays in the city of Medina. It's deemed that Imam al-Hadi at this time is not really much of a threat, but a teacher is placed over him with the interest of trying to brainwash him, to try and get him to accept more of the doctrine that's established, to accept the byline that the authority of the Banu Abbas is absolute and that he needs to fit into the system. What's found is that the teacher who was appointed for him was a well-known theologian of the time. After some time of spending in the company because of the force of the government, comes to the conclusion and realizes that Imam al-Hadi at the age of 6 teaches Quran better than this theologian does. So when someone asks, how is the young boy with you? Is he learning from you? He replies, young boy, he's my teacher. He teaches me about the Quran, things I didn't know. And in this way, Imam al-Hadi gains his independence intellectually from the system at hand and continues this process and establishes a system of teaching with legatees and those who are, for example, the Wikala network, the appointees who could go out and communicate to others outside of the city of Medina. And the Imam would establish his base on the basis of education in the city of Medina. Now, the Dawr of Mu'tasim and the 8 years that Imam Hadi spends as the Imam Waqt under the Dawr of Mu'tasim is focused on the process of teaching and education. One of the important elements to pay attention to is that the Ahlul Bayt's authority was never on the basis of political power, was never on the basis of physical power, military power, was not on the basis of, for example, using of politics of any sort. Their authority was on something that created value in society and always brought positive change in society, and that element was knowledge. And the differentiating factor between the Imam and everyone else was that the knowledge that they presented was perfect, which is why the Imam's outlook to society, should he be left alone, would always be the process of teaching and education of Islam and promoting the values of Islam and guiding society through the tools of Islam. Mu'tasim, in the meanwhile, while Imam Hadi is in Medina teaching, Mu'tasim, during his 9 years of authority, goes through the process of establishing Samarra and creating it as a military capital. See, Ma'mun, followed by Mu'tasim, to maintain their authority, needed soldiers to support them. And what they did was they brought in Turkish mercenaries and created an army of Turkish mercenaries called the Ghilman, who were the supporters of the Khalifa to be his enforcers and to execute his rule and his authority. The purpose of these paid hired swords was whether or not the Khalifa was popular or not, as long as you paid the army, you had authority. Now, Ma'mun tried to be very politically savvy, but kept a strong military presence so that where his personality and his savvy in politics failed, the army was present to fill in. Mu'tasim was not as savvy as his brother. He was not as politically conniving, you could say, or politically articulate, you could say. And therefore, he relied more on the army element that his brother had built to create authority for himself. And he relied much more on the military to execute his orders than to have orders that people liked to listen to. So we saw the beginning of a militarization of the Khilafat and a reliance on military. And that military in particular were those who were from the Turkish origin, not from the Arab Persian origin that majority of people of the time were accepting of, and where the authority of the Islamic government was seated in the Arab environments and receiving power and support from the Persian environments, rather from the Turkish environment. This Turkish army becomes very significant as we look forward and we see the decay of the political system that goes on. So during the time of Mu'tasim, during these 8 years of the Imamate of Imam al-Hadi, most of it is spent in fair amounts of peace in the city of Medina, while politically the Khulafa are using more militarization. They're shifting to a military campus in Samarra. Samarra's original name being Surra Man Ra'a. Pleased is the one, or comforted is the one who sees it. That this was a beautiful place to go. It was outside of the city, and it was an establishment of the military. The discussion of why Mu'tasim did this, by the way, is to say that as he brought in these Turks into the capital of Baghdad, and these were soldiers empowered by the government, the soldiers didn't really care for the people, and they didn't really value the lives of the residents of Baghdad. So there would be stories and events where soldiers on their horses would trample people because they were in their way. That they said, as a soldier, I need to be somewhere and you're in my way, and they would trample a person. And this created a system of civil unrest. That the Khalifa needed the army to ensure that his authority would be cemented and that no one would question him. He needed to have a strong army element present around him at all times to make sure that no one would dare try to overthrow his government. But the people of Baghdad were feeling persecuted and abused by the military presence that existed. So Mu'tasim does what? Shifts the entirety of the capital and takes his entire army with him and establishes Samarra and continues the militarization of the Khulafa of the time. At the end of the life of Mu'tasim in 842, al-Wathiq billah takes the authority of Khilafat. Now, Wathiq's Khilafat lasts for a period of 5 years. During this 5 years, he takes what Mu'tasim has established and continues down this path of establishing and continuing the persecution against those who are the ideological others against him. He also is someone who relied a lot on, for example, the arts and the beauty, and he was someone who wanted to enjoy his life more than he wanted to be a person who does work. And for 5 years, he kind of took it easy and enjoyed his freedoms and enjoyed his lavish lifestyle and used militarization to kind of make sure that his control was firm and that no one bothered him. It was a stable time period, but the fact that he wasn't someone who paid attention to the government in detail had its impact going forward of strengthening and creating the military as more of an independent arm as opposed to one that was consistently subjugated in the authority of the Khalifa. So the military power is gaining during the time of Wafiq. Followed him by Mutawakkil. The Khilafat of Mutawakkil, and Mutawakkil himself is one of the most sinister characters in the history of talking about the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. Mutawakkil's animosity for the Ahlul Bayt, followers of the Ahlul Bayt, was extreme. And the 14 years of his Khilafat is one of the most difficult period upon the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Mutawakkil went through and created consistent persecution if you loved Ahlul Bayt, and created an abusive environment for anyone who wanted to have an attachment to Ahlul Bayt. There are a number of things that happen in Mutawakkil's Khilafat. Mutawakkil's Khilafat lasts for a period of 14 years, and it is a very abusive 14 years with a great amount of oppression and suppression of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Some of the elements that we talk about during the time of Mutawakkil is reducing the salaries of and reducing the financial viability of anyone who associated themselves with Ahlul Bayt, bringing the people who loved Ahlul Bayt to their knees financially and creating such an environment that if you love the Ahlul Bayt, you are kept in such a level of poverty that the women would complain, we only possess, for one household, there's only one outfit that is sufficiently considered hijab that a woman can wear it to pray. Meaning that if you had wives and daughters and sisters in one household, there was only one sufficient hijab that would make it sufficient for that woman to pray. And they would take that outfit and pass it from woman to woman to woman to woman when it came time for salat, because there just wasn't enough clothes or appropriate clothes that it could be considered hijab for salat. The persecution of Mutawakkil for the followers of Ahlul Bayt was extreme, where yes, he ended the mihna and the ideological differences amongst the majority of Muslims. He instead focused and doubled down on the persecution of the Shia and finding them and persecuting them at every level. One of the elements that takes place in the time of Mutawakkil is the forbidding of the ziyarat of Imam Hussein. Not just forbidding, but the intended destruction of Karbala and the ziyarat of Imam Hussein in Karbala. The famous story goes essentially that Mutawakkil, in a moment of celebration, calls for a lady who is very famous as a singer. And when he calls her, he intends for her to come immediately, and she doesn't come immediately. And he, having his network of spies and soldiers, research and says, why isn't she coming when I called her? The immediate explanation is to say, oh, well, she was visiting relatives. Or when she comes, she gives the excuse and says, I was visiting relatives, or I was on a journey. I was, doing a contract, and I just got back to you. I wasn't in town doing a contract. Mutawakkil comes to learn that she had gone to Karbala for the ziyarat of Imam Hussein. And this sets him off that the ziyarat of Imam Hussein should not be something that competes in intention with the desires of the Khalifa Mutawakkil. And he demands for the destruction of the land of Karbala and the graves of Karbala. Famously, what happens is that he says, turn the Furat onto the land of Karbala and bury it underwater and make it a part of the river. And so that no one knows the value of this place. And the water, instead of overcoming the grave of Imam Hussein, flows around the grave of Imam Hussein, doesn't cover. In another instance, it's reported that he sent cattle to plow the land, remove all of the markers, destroy everything that's there. There weren't bulldozers in those days. So the way you would do this is with cattle. But the cattle would refuse to destroy the grave of Imam Hussein. The cattle would refuse to walk over these graves. So Mutawakkil, in his frustration, essentially set a policy that said that no one is allowed to go to the grave of Imam Hussein under penalty of death, and continued the persecution in such a way that it's narrated to say that people would actually suffer the causes of death that the famous that we hear that you would have to get a hand cut off to go to Ziyarat of Imam Hussein. This is that time period, or one of those time periods in which these statements were wrought to be true because of the severity of the persecution. It's famous that there was a man by the name of Ibn Sakit. Ibn Sakit was one of the famous artists and Arabic linguists of the time in Baghdad. And he was brought to tutor the sons of Mutawakkil. And Mutawakkil had two boys, and Ibn Sakit, being the best of scholars of the time, was given the responsibility to tutor the sons of the Khalifa. Famously, Ibn Sakit once was teaching these boys, and Mutawakkil came in with pride in his heart, thinking of his own greatness and position. He turns to Ibn Sakit and he says, "Aren't my boys great? Don't you love my boys? Aren't they better than Hassan and Hussein, the sons of Ali?" Ibn Sakit loved the Ahlul Bayt, and he couldn't keep quiet in this instance. Famously, Ibn Sakit, and this is a very well-known tradition, that Ibn Sakit, upon hearing Mutawakkil creating a comparison between his sons and the grandsons of the Holy Prophet, Ibn Sakit lost it. Now, what would make a man think that his kids and the Prophet's kids are the same? Like, you can't even imagine that equivocation. But this is where pride and power are destructive and corruptive elements, that you begin to think of yourself as something that you're not. Remember, it's the same consequence as how Iblis thought, because of the greatness of the status that he had attained, he doesn't have to listen to the command of Allah. Similarly, Mutawakkil dared to ask the question. Imagine the mentality that he creates a parallel. He says, "Who's better in your eyes, my sons or Hassan and Hussein?" Ibn Sakit loses it. Ibn Sakit says, "Hassan and Hussein, the slave of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Qambar in my eyes is better than your children." Mutawakkil loses his mind, that he says, "A slave of Ali is better than my children?" He commands, and it's a very famous command, where he says, remove his tongue, as a consequence of him speaking to the Khalifa in this way. But not only did he insist on the removal of the tongue, that you would say that, oh, they pulled out the tongue and they cut it off. No, no, no. He said, remove it from the back of his head. Where the tongue originates, I want you to cut it from there so that there's nothing left there. And unfortunately, obviously, this wasn't a surgical time. So the cutting of this tongue led to the blood loss and led to the death of Ibn Sakit, and he was killed for the love of Ahlul Bayt. Meaning that Mutawakkil's oppression of the followers of Ahlul Bayt was such that he didn't care who it was, what they meant to the world and society, that the best of scholarship at that time, he killed simply why? He felt offended that this individual preferred the Prophet's family over Mutawakkil's family. The horror stories of this time are plenty, but essentially one of the things that Mutawakkil does is he begins the oppression of Imam al-Hadi as well. And he does it in a very savvy way. He simply appoints a governor, Abdullah ibn Hakim. Abdullah ibn Hakim was someone, again, who had animosity and hatred towards Ahlul Bayt. And Abdullah ibn Hakim becomes the governor of Medina. And part of his governorship is oppress anyone who loves Ahlul Bayt, including specifically Imam al-Hadi, the leading leader of the Ahlul Bayt theology, ideology, and the community of the Banu Hashim and the people of Medina, who all looked up to Imam Hadi, because for the past almost 20 years or 16 years of his imamate, Imam al-Hadi has been sitting in Medina teaching, guiding, correcting the social issues, correcting the ideological issues that were being implemented by the Khulafa, by taking this opportunity again to teach and guide humanity and restore the knowledge and love of Allah in society. So the people of Medina are loyal to the Imam, because the Imam isn't just saying, follow me. The Imam is saying, I'm solving your problems. I'm guiding you to a better life. I'm guiding you to Jannah and away from the fire of hell. I'm bringing you closer to your purpose of creation. So the Imam's effort is huge, and people follow him for it. And Mutawakkil wants to break this. So he appoints Abdullah ibn Hakim as the governor. Abdullah ibn Hakim begins the persecution of the Shia. And then he begins persecuting Imam al-Hadi and sending letters to Mutawakkil against Imam Hadi? Imam al-Hadi replies by writing his own letter of complaint to Mutawakkil and saying to Mutawakkil that this governor has animosity against me and he's abusive to me without reason. I implore you to remove him or replace him or to stop him from this behavior of being oppressive, which is against the religion of Islam. The Imam's actions are amar bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, enjoin good, forbid evil. That here is an oppressive man, remove him, and that your job as the leader of the Muslimin is to do good deeds. Do good deeds, protect the people. Mutawakkil uses this as his opportunity. And he says, sure, no problem. I'll remove him. He immediately removes him. And then he sends 300 soldiers to collect Imam Hadi and bring him to Samarra. And the 300 soldiers show up at the door of Imam al-Hadi and they say, listen, Imam Hadi, we've heard that you're upset with the governor of the time. The Khalifa has invited you to come and stay with him if you don't like the governor, to leave this place and come to him and be his guest for a while we sort all of this out and fix all of these issues. Imam al-Hadi finds himself in a situation where the Khalifa isn't giving him an opportunity and sends soldiers to collect him. Now, understand something. If your entire base is political savvy or, for example, kindness and goodness, or you have any positive intent, someone writes you a complaint about your governor, you answer it. Or you send an ambassador to deal with it. Mutawakkil's move is to know that the Imam is entrenched in the city of Medina, and the Imam has social support there. So to make it so that his opinion is valid over the opinion of Imam al-Hadi, he sends soldiers. And the soldiers politely ask the Imam to come along. Now understand something. If you politely want to send someone or bring someone, you don't send 300 soldiers. These were soldiers ready for being soldiers and acting as soldiers who insisted that the Imam join them. And in this way, Imam al-Hadi had to leave the city of Medina and migrate to Samarra. Now, some of the miracles of this time, some of the benefits of how the Imam solved some of these issues, we'll talk about next week. But this was the transition phase where we saw the Imam being forced out of the city of Medina, much like Imam Hussein was forced out of the city of Medina. Imam al-Qasim was forced out of the city of Medina. Imam Radha was forced from the city of Medina. And Imam Jawad was forced from the city of Medina. All of these Aimma, you take a look and see today, their graves are far from the city of Medina. Why? Because they were forced to leave this place. They didn't choose to leave this place. And in the same context, Imam Hadi was forced to leave the lands of Medina by these 300 soldiers. Once he's brought to Samarra, and what demonstrates and shows that Mutawakkil's intention wasn't pure, is that Imam al-Hadi comes to Samarra in the time of Mutawakkil, and similar to his father, Imam Jawad, who when he went to the city of Baghdad for Ma'mun, he was a child, wasn't allowed into the court, wasn't allowed interaction. Mutawakkil was a bit more blatant because Imam Hadi wasn't a child anymore. Mutawakkil made it that he brought Imam Hadi to the city of Samarra and then had no place to put him. So he brought him to the city and said, yeah, you can't leave, stay here now. And as a consequence, if you don't have a house established there, you don't have resources there, the Imam was forced to be on the outskirts of the city with the poor people who go to places where cities are to find some way to earn a living. Now, Imam Hadi never complained, and the Imam was perfectly fine with the poor people because Rasulullah lived amongst the poor. The first to follow the religion of Islam were the poor people, not the rich people. So Imam Hadi was comfortable amongst the poor, and he stayed there until he changed the environment that all of these people around him were drawn and attracted to him and were benefiting from him. And he was changing this environment and making it more positive, making these people independent, making them follow the true religion of Islam, stepping away from the fear of the Khalifa. That Mutawakkil suddenly woke up and said, hey, hold on a second here. I put this guy in the worst of areas to silence him, to separate him from authority, to not give him access to friends and family, and he's revolutionizing the area. So he takes Imam Hadi out of there and begins the process of imprisonment of the Imam. And he puts him under a house arrest in one of his top advisors' locations. Now, one of the titles of Imam al-Hadi, much like his son, is called al-Askari. Al-Askari means the one who was in the garrison because the Asghar is the garrison, is the military. Now remember, Samarra was established with the Turkish military there because they were abusing the people of Baghdad. So the entirety of Samarra is built around these garrisons and their families and their communities being established in the quadrants around the central place of the Mahkama, of the palace of the Khalifa. In this situation, Imam al-Hadi is imprisoned, and this is why one of the reasons that Imam Hadi and his son are known as Askari is that they were in the place where the military courts were and around the central location where the entirety of the military surrounded them and secluded them from the access to normal people. In spite of this, Imam al-Hadi continues to teach and guide humanity, and he continues to be a guiding light even through all of the oppression and the imprisonments that he goes through, until eventually, and we'll mention some of the i'jaz of the Imam, some of the miracles of the Imam during the time of Mutawakkil as well too, that Mutawakkil drops dead. And this ends one of the most severe periods of the oppression of the Ahlul Bayt. Now, what's interesting is, how does Mutawakkil drop dead? Mutawakkil drops dead because Mutawakkil's own son kills his father. Muntasir, who becomes the next Khalifa, found the oppression of Mutawakkil against the Ahlul Bayt. And the famous story, Mutawakkil abuses Imam Ali publicly. His son rises and says, yeah, you can't do that. And his son, seeing his father as an apostate, kills his father. Now, the Ahlul Bayt prevented from actions like this and said that even if your father is a bad man, a son should not be, and nor was the son empowered to, as a legal authority or representative, to commit this action. But Muntasir goes and kills his father because of his father's abuse of Ahlul Bayt. As a consequence, Muntasir, once he becomes the Khalifa, is someone who removes the Imam from his imprisonment, removes the Imam from the restrictions he was in, and eases the restrictions on the Shias and provided resources to them. But for the gravity of his sin, his life is only a period of 6 months, and he himself is then assassinated. Now, is this because the political element or the military element didn't like the fact of what Muntasir did? Or is this the command of Allah that there is no barakah in the life of one who breaks what Allah has established and disrespects this process of the relationships Allah has built, no matter the evil that they've done? It's a point of discussion. But Muntasir is killed, and the military is now in the process of appointing the next system of leadership. Remember, the Khulafa, by relying on this Turkish military, empowered it, gave it resources, gave it access, gave it position, gave it the knowledge of the environment. And now the military is looking for puppet governments, and which is where Musta'in becomes the Khalifa of the time. Musta'in's Khilafat after Muntasir lasts for about a period of 4 years. And this is where it was the Turkish military that was now in charge of appointing the puppet and appointing the leadership and putting someone in place that would suit their benefits and suit their purpose. True power shifted from the Khalifa to the military, and in the hands of the Turkish military that had been empowered to protect the Khalifa was now deciding who would be the Khalifa. Now, this period of Musta'in was marked by a great deal of conflict, internal warfare, civil warfare, and the military making decisions on what it was that the government should be doing and how the government should be operating. And this is where we really say that Musta'in's Khilafat is, and this is the 6th Khalifa in the life of Imam al-Hadi, that the decentralization of power from the Khalifa and shifting to the military is really happening and taking place at this point in time, to the extent where we say that it's truly the military who's controlling the entirety of the government, and Musta'in is just stamping papers and sitting on a chair and enjoying his life and not allowed to comment, discuss, or do anything against the government at this point in time. So here we see that the Khilafat is declining, is fragmentation, is military control, is happening, that it's more authoritarian from the militaristic point, but there's really no value added to society by the Khalifa, and the Khalifa is entirely just a figurehead and a position that's present. Now, the truth of this is that while Musta'in did continue some of the persecutions against the Ahlul Bayt, since he was such a weak system of authority, he really didn't accomplish much, nor did he do much. But what we notice is that there's a debate or discussion to say that did Imam Hadi in this time leave the city of Samarra, or did he stay in the city of Samarra? Overwhelmingly, the opinion is that the Imam at this point in time is not allowed to leave the city of Samarra and stays in this place, which eventually leads to the 7th Khalifa. But after the fall of Musta'in comes Mu'taz. Mu'taz was again a puppet of the military government, and he was someone who was motivated against Imam al-Hadi, and was responsible for the shahadat and the killing of Imam al-Hadi. His reign was a very weak Khalifa, an entirely military control, a great level of financial crisis of the time, and a great deal of pressure that was placed on the Imam until the time of his death. These Khalifas, 7 Khalifas, and 7 different perspectives. One of the most important things that the Imam does is in a period when Mutawakkil was present and he attempted to destroy the presence of Ahlul Bayt, destroy the significance of the Ahlul Bayt and the position of Imam Hussein. Imam al-Hadi is the one who perseveres through this environment and preserves the religion of Islam. Which is why, if you look at and say that, yes, we may not have much in terms of the biography of all of the detailed interactions we have from the time of the Imam, we definitely know that looking at how these political leaders were affecting the time and how they were behaving, the fact that love of Ahlul Bayt and Shiism continues to flourish and grow, even through this difficult period, it's the effort of the Imam. Those years where he had some peaceful time in the city of Medina teaching and laying out infrastructure or establishing systems of authority in the environment, that eventually when the Imam is secluded from society and is forced away from people, that there's a system of legitimacy by which education continues and guidance continues among society. And the fact that we still till today have people focused on studying Islam and living their life on Islamic values and not being lost in things like, for example, Greco-Roman philosophy, not being lost in ideological differences or theological differences or philosophical differences, but instead focusing on the true message of Quran and Ahlul Bayt. It's a victory of the Imam. It's a teaching of the Imam and it's a guidance of the Imam throughout his life, throughout this very difficult period of instability and change in system of authoritarianism, from moving from one system of authoritarianism of the Khalifa to that of the military. And that military shift eventually down the line, we see lead to, for example, what could be called the transition to the Ottoman rule. And we could look at that as a future of history. So studying and looking at these elements, and looking at the 7 Khulafa and how their weaknesses and their behavior impacted Islam as a whole and impacted us and our access to the Imam, is one of the important legacies of seeing that Imam Hadi preserved religion even in this time. Inshallah, next week we'll continue our discussion. We'll talk about some of the practical elements, some of the teachings of the Imam, some of the miracles of the Imam during this time period that were important for preserving the religion of Islam and spoke what we would call truth to power, that even though Mutawakkil tried to suppress the authority of Ahlul Bayt, that Imam Hadi had the ability to preserve the voice of Ahlul Bayt, and no one could compete with him in that element. We end this discussion again by calling on Allah, Nad'uka bismika al-azim al-a'zam, al-a'azz al-ajall al-akram. 10 times we called out together. Ya Allah, 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 Ya Allah. يا محمود بحق محمد يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الإحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, we ask you by the right of the Ahlul Bayt, by the right of this Tuesday night, by the right of the time of Maghrib, by the right of the mu'mineen present and those absent, oh Allah, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, those who are sick amongst our families and our communities, give them shifa'ah. Those who are suffering through strife and insecurity, give aman to the mu'mineen, muslimin, wherever they may be. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the followers and supporters of the Imam of our time. Entitle us to ziyarat of Ahlul Bayt in this world and the shifa of Ahlul Bayt in the hereafter. Remembering our marhumin, khususan for those that may know or may not know, one of our great scholars, one of our leaders of our community, one of our guides, one of the people in whose shade we sat, Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Hussain Zaidi Saab, passed away last night. Remembering him and all of our marhumin, 1 Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas, with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.